Well, hospital porters' pride and dignity stop the New World Order. Welcome to Herpanwo TV. Right, today I'm at Beaumont Street in Oxford, and this here in front of you, this huge Victorian edifice, is the Randolph Hotel. It goes right up there like that. It's a huge, huge hotel, and it's one of the, in fact, it is the poshest and most exclusive hotel in Oxford. It's where all the bigwigs stay when they come here, and well, Oxford has an awful lot of bigwigs. Bill Clinton always stays here when he travels. Margaret Thatcher, people like that, film stars. Michael Jackson stayed here. Oh, it's you name it. They stayed here whenever they come to Oxford. It's quite an old hotel, as you can see. It's 19th century, like I said. I mean, what's it like to actually work in there? What's it like for these guys standing outside the door? And, you know, and not only them, but the people down below, you know, in the kitchens, below stairs, the maids, butlers, waiters, night porters, people like that. Well, I can tell you what it's quite like now up to a point, because I mean, I know people who've worked here and they say it's quite nice, you know, but has it always been so? One answer might come from this book I've been reading here, Down and Out in Paris and London by George Orwell. Now, we all know George Orwell as the author of books like 1984, Animal Farm. His fiction work is well renowned. But of course, he is also he's not just a fictional writer. He's written many autobiographical essays, and this is one of them. Down and Out in Paris and London charts about 2 years of George Orwell's life. It's not really a story with any particular narrative to it. It's just a kind of slice of his life, so to speak. You know, it starts at a particular date and ends at another date. It charts 2 years of his life when he was a young man in the late 1920s, and he was trying to earn a living. He was beginning to earn a living from his writing, and he was having a bit of trouble. He was in Paris and London, basically trying to sell articles to newspapers, that kind of thing. He wasn't famous like he is today, or as he was later in his own life. And during that time when he was down and out, and during that time when he was not well known and not very successful, he was very poor, and he lived among the poorest people in those cities, and experienced what their life was like. For them it would be their whole lives. And he did. The story begins when he's staying at his place in Paris, and he goes to work at something he calls Hotel X. He doesn't mention its actual name, but it's a hotel, rather like this one. I mean, it's an old hotel in Paris. Now, this is the late 1920s. It's not that long ago in terms of history. It's within living memory of some people who are alive today. There are people very old, but they'll be able to tell you exactly what it was like to live in those times. Now, Orwell describes, he gets a job as what they call a plongeur. Now, I gather that means a kitchen skivvy. I mean, Orwell uses a lot of French in this book, and he doesn't always translate it, but it's a kitchen skivvy, basically, someone who does the washing up, the cleaning in the kitchen, prepares basic food, you know, ready-made food, that kind of thing. And basically the lowest of the low in the hotel, and he describes what it was like to live in and work in Hotel X. Well, live is more to the point, because he was there all the time. And he was like, basically, he would start, he would start out in the morning at 7 a.m. and go and work in this horrible scullery and kitchen, which was, they had a thermometer on the wall. It was 130 degrees Fahrenheit, not centigrade. There was no fresh air. There was ovens, the heat was coming from the ovens. There was filth and dirt everywhere. And the work was very intense, and he'd do that till about, I think it was 1 p.m. Then he'd stop at 1 p.m. and he'd be off duty till 5 p.m, where he'd usually go to a bistro and get himself pissed, because that's the only way he could cope. And then he'd go back at 5 p.m. and work till 9 p.m. And he would do this 6 days a week, sometimes 7 days, when he got Sunday off, but you know, every other Sunday he'd usually be called into work with no extra pay, and he earned barely a pittance enough to keep a roof over his head, you know. But it was, if you just imagine, I mean, what that must have been like. I mean, he describes it in real detail, and I tell you what, I will never ever complain about my job again, I swear, and neither will you after you've read this book. You know, if people, of course, I mean, people could do, to do this job, anyone could do it if they were trained. If you got used to it, of course. I mean, he got used to it. But you'd be dead by the time you were in your 40s or 50s. You wouldn't live to see your old age. The reason I bring this up is because I've been thinking about this an awful lot, about what it means in terms of society, because I think we're heading back to that time. We're heading back to that age that Orwell talks about. Thank you. We're heading back to the time that Orwell talks about in this book. We're going back to an age where people work as slaves. I just want to read you a passage from the book, actually. It's a short passage. But it's very, very revealing about his mindset, because Orwell was a writer who was very, very primarily motivated by social justice. His whole career was like a quest for social justice. I'll read you this book. Right, for what they are worth, I want to give my opinions about the life of a Paris plongeur. Now, the word plongeur actually means diver, so it's a kind of slang, but it's basically like, say, a kitchen skivvy, basically. When one comes to think of it, it is strange that thousands of people in a great modern city should spend their waking hours swabbing dishes in hot dens underground. The question I'm raising is why this life goes on, what purpose it serves, and who wants it to continue and why. I'm not talking about merely rebellious fainéant, I don't know what that means, attitude. I'm trying to consider the social significance of a plongeur's life. I think one should start by saying that a plongeur is one of the slaves of the modern world. Not that there is any need to whine over him, for he's better off than many manual workers. God, if he's better off, you can imagine what the others are like. But still, he's no freer than if he were bought and sold. His work is servile and without art. He's paid just enough to keep him alive. His only holiday is the sack. He is cut off from marriage, or if he marries, his wife must work too. Except by a lucky chance, he has no escape from this life save into prison. At this moment, there are men with university degrees scrubbing dishes in Paris for 10 or 15 hours a day. One cannot say that it is mere idleness on their part, for an idle man cannot be a plongeur. They have simply been trapped by routine, which makes thought impossible. If plongeurs thought at all, they would have long ago formed a union and gone on strike for... I've got to try and turn the page with one hand. I had this problem in Blackpool last week. For better treatment. But they do not think, because they have no time. They have no leisure for it. Their life has made slaves of them. The question is, why does this slavery continue? People have a way of taking it for granted that all work is done for a sound purpose. They see somebody else doing a disagreeable job and think they could have solved this by saying that the job is necessary. That they've solved it saying the job's necessary. Coal mining, for example, is hard work, but it is necessary. We must have coal. Working in the sewers is unpleasant, but someone must work in the sewers. And similarly with a plongeur's work. Some people must feed in restaurants, and so other people must swab dishes for 80 hours a week. It is the work of civilization, therefore unquestionable. This point is worth considering. Is a plongeur's work really necessary to civilization? We have a vague feeling that it must be honest work because it's hard and disagreeable, and we have made a sort of fetish of manual work. We see a man cutting down a tree, we make sure that he's filling a social need just because he uses his muscles. It does not occur to us that he may only be cutting down a beautiful tree to make room for a hideous statue. I believe it is the same with a plongeur. He earns the bread in the sweat of his brow, but it does not follow that he's doing anything useful. He may only be supplying a luxury which very often is not a luxury. As an example of what I mean by luxuries which are not luxuries, take an extreme case, such as one hardly sees in Europe, an Indian rickshaw puller or Gary pony. In any Far Eastern town there are rickshaw pullers by the hundred, black wretches weighing 8 stone, clad in loincloths. Some of them are diseased, some of them are 50 years old. For miles on end they trot in the sun and the rain, head down, dragging the shafts with sweat dripping from their grey moustaches. When they go too slowly, the passenger calls them names. They earn 30 or 40 rupees a month and cough their lungs out after a few years. The Gary ponies are gaunt, vicious things that have been sold cheap as having a few years' work left in them. Their master looks on the whip as a substitute for food. Their work expresses itself in a sort of equation. Whip plus food equals energy. Therefore, it is about 60% whip and 40% food. Sometimes their necks are encircled by one vast saw, so that they drag all day on raw flesh. It is still possible to make them work, however hard. However, it is just a question of thrashing them so hard that the pain behind outweighs the pain in front. After a few years, even the whip loses its virtue and the pony goes to the knacker's yard. These are instances of unnecessary work, for there is no real need for gharries and rickshaws. They only exist because Orientals consider it vulgar to walk. They are luxuries, and as anyone who has ridden them knows, very poor luxuries. They afford a small amount of convenience which cannot possibly balance the suffering of the men or the animals. Similarly with the plongeur. He's a king compared with a rickshaw puller or a gharry pony, but his case is analogous. He's a slave of a hotel or restaurant, and his slavery is more or less useless. For after all, where's the real need for big hotels and smart restaurants? They're supposed to provide luxury, but in reality they provide only a cheap, shoddy imitation of it. Nearly everyone hates hotels. Some restaurants are better than others, but it's impossible to get as good a meal in a restaurant as one can get for the same expense in a private house. No doubt hotels and restaurants must exist, but there is no need that they should enslave hundreds of people. What makes the work in them is not the essentials, it is the shams that are supposed to represent luxury. Sometimes, as it is called, means, in effect, merely that the staff work more and the customers pay more. No one benefits except the proprietor, who will presently buy himself a striped villa at Deauville. Essentially, a smart hotel is a place where 100 people toil like devils in order that 200 may pay through the nose for things they don't really want or need. If the nonsense were cut out of hotels and restaurants and the work done with simple efficiency, the plongeurs might work 6 or 8 hours a day instead of 10 or 15. Suppose it is granted that a plongeur's work is more or less useless. Then the question follows, why does everyone want him to go on working? I'm trying to go beyond the immediate economic cause and consider what pleasure it can give anybody to think of men swabbing dishes for life. For there is no doubt that people, comfortably suited people, do find pleasure in such thoughts. A slave, Marcus Cato said, a slave should be working when he is not sleeping. It does not matter whether his work is needed or not, he must work, because work is in itself good, for slaves at least. This sentiment still survives and has piled up mountains of useless drudgery. I believe that this instinct to perpetuate useless work is at the bottom simply fear of the mob. The mob are such, as thought in the runs, are such low animals that they would be dangerous if they had leisure. It is safer to keep them too busy to think. A rich man who happens to be intellectually honest, if he is questioned about the improvement of working conditions, usually says something like this: "We know that poverty is unpleasant. In fact, since it is so remote, we rather enjoy harrowing ourselves with the thought of its unpleasantness. But don't expect us to do anything about it. We are sorry for you lower classes, just as we are sorry for a cat with the mange. But we will fight like devils against any improvement in your condition. We feel that you are much safer as you are. The present state of affairs suits us, and we are not going to take the risk of setting you free, even by an extra hour a day. So, dear brothers, since evidently you must sweat to pay for our trips to Italy, sweat and be damned to you." This is particularly the attitude of intelligent, cultivated people. One can read the substance of it in 100 essays. Very few cultivated people have less than, say, £400 a year, and naturally they side with the rich because they imagine that any liberty conceded to the poor is a threat to their own liberty, foreseeing some dismal Marxist utopia as the alternative. The educated man prefers to keep things much as they are. Possibly he does not like his fellow rich very much, but he supposes that even the vulgarest of them are less inimical to his pleasures, more his kind of people than the poor, and that he had better stand by them. It is this fear of supposedly dangerous mob that makes nearly all intelligent people conservative in their opinions. Fear of the mob is a superstitious fear. It is based on the idea that there is some mysterious fundamental difference between rich and poor, as though they were two different races, like Negroes and white men. But in reality, there is no difference. The mass of rich and poor are differentiated by their incomes and nothing else. The average millionaire is only an average dishwasher dressed in a new suit. change places, and handy dandy. Which is the justice? Which is the thief? Everyone who has mixed on equal terms with the poor knows this quite well. But the trouble is that intelligent, cultivated people, the very people who might be expected to have liberal opinions, never do mix with the poor. For what do the majority of educated people know about poverty? In my copy of Villon's poems, the editor has actually thought it necessary to explain the line ne pas ne voyant qu'aux fenêtres, and I think that means bread never looks out the window. I think. It's so remote is even hunger. So remote is even hunger from the educated man's experience. From this ignorance, a superstitious fear of the mob results quite naturally. The educated man pictures a horde of submen wanting only a day's liberty to to loot his house, burn his books, shoot him, and set him to work minding a machine or sweeping out a lavatory. Anything, he thinks, any injustice, sooner than let the mob loose. He does not see that since there is no difference between the mass of rich and poor, there is no question of setting the mob loose. The mob is in fact loose now, and in the shape of rich men is using its power to set up enormous treadmills of boredom, such as smart hotels. To sum up, a plongeur is a slave, and a wasted slave, doing stupid, unnecessary work. He is kept at work, ultimately because of the vague feeling that he will be dangerous if he had leisure. And educated people who should be on his side acquiesce in the process, because they know nothing about him and constantly are afraid of him. I say this of the plongeur because it is his case I have been considering. It would apply equally to numberless types of worker. There are only my own ideas about the basic facts of a plongeur's life, made without reference to immediate economic questions, and no doubt largely platitudes. I present them as a sample of the thoughts that are put in one's head by working in a hotel. On that, Papanlo TV viewers, that attitude is still alive today. It's alive by the people who might well stay in this hotel. Henry Kissinger, Margaret Thatcher, various other minor nobility, minor delegates of the Illuminati, minor servants of the Illuminati, not the Illuminati itself. I mean, Orwell goes on in the book to, he moves to London eventually, and he has to live on the streets as a homeless man, which is pretty awful, because he had to stay in shelters that were virtually prisons, and he wasn't allowed to sit on the street. But really, it's the hotel issue I'm concentrating on here, the idea of employment, the idea of work and what it means. I'm just going to cross the road. The reason I brought this subject up is because I feel that we're heading back into the world Orwell lived in as a young man. I was watching Slaxer's video just yesterday about his friend who's on job seekers allowance, and you can have a quick glimpse inside this ornate doorway, and you see the wonders inside. Yeah, it's like Orwell actually says that the cooks spit in the soup in the hotel, and they're amazing. I mean, they do it. They just say they're not out of malice. They just spit in the soup. It makes it look better. You know, there's a scene where they drop a chicken in down a lift shaft. A roast chicken, they just wash it off and put it back on the plate. No one cares. This is what he means by the imitation of luxury. Anyway, I was watching Slaxer's video, and he talked about his friend doing job seekers allowance, right? Well, it was very, very meaningful that they're at I describe the job centre as an open prison, and being on job seekers allowance is like an open prison, and now they're actually making people work without pay. You know, this is this idea that somehow, again, it goes back to what Orwell said in the book about the fear of the mob, about how if they had leisure, even when you're not paying them, they'd be dangerous. And somehow it's almost like they have to work out some kind of sick principle. If you can't give them a proper job, you have to give them a fake job. You know, and we're heading back to that world. We're heading back to the world that Orwell talks about in the book. It's actually happening pretty soon. Kids are going to be, they won't be going to school, they'll be going to vocational training centres where they learn nothing except how to do a particular job, which will be chosen from them at birth. Like Kurt Russell in that film's, what's it called, Soldier. You know. And what we got to do, we can't cooperate with that, we've got to stop that. Because, you know, it depends. In a sense, we get wise and we have to rebel. We have to resist this march towards this monstrous sort of slave ship, to use Charlie Veitch's term, that we're on. I mean, Slaxer puts it very well. He talks about the Daily Mail reading scum, Well, I mean, those are strong words, but I can understand his bitterness, because these people, in a sense, we are forging our own shackles by demanding that we're actually demanding these new measures and saying, bring them in, bring them in, bring back the chain gangs, put the unemployed digging trenches, let them do all that kind of thing. What they don't realise is, of course, one day they might be unemployed and they'll be on those trenches. It's this divide and rule thing, like Pastor Niemoller said. First they came for the Jews, and I did nothing because I wasn't a Jew, and it goes on and on. Eventually, then they came for me, and there's no one left to talk out for me. Like I said, we must resist this at any cost. Even they want to threaten us with taking away our JSA, things like that. Well, unfortunately, the only answer you can give is, I don't. If you're forced into do something which is harmful to your fellow man or to yourself, you have to say no. A lot of people have been in that position where they've been forced to take a stand on a matter of principle. They knew they're losing their income. Like Tony Farrell, the policeman who spoke up about 9/11, they lose their income, they lose their home, they lose their pension. The system threatens you with destitution. Now, a lot of people have been in that position and they have survived. They've managed. You mustn't be afraid of this system. You've got to stand up to it and stare it in the face and say, I don't care. So I strongly recommend this book, Down and Out in Paris and London by George Orwell. I've actually got to read some more of Orwell's autobiographical essays, because this is excellent. He's easily one of my favourite writers, and he's one of the greatest crusaders for social justice that the world has ever seen, and I admire him enormously. Well, thank you for watching Papanwo TV at the Randolph Hotel in Oxford. Hospital Porters, Pride and Dignity, stop the New World Order.